Okay, so I'm making this video screen capture of the topics we discussed in class on April 3rd, 2023, MRK460. There's only about 7 or 8 people in class today, whatever. I'm still going to try to give you this information so you can know what going into the final couple of weeks of the course. So basically what I'm doing is I'm going to talk over the stuff on the screen that I would have talked about that you would have heard if you had come to class today. Um, and the people who did come to class today, this will also help them to follow up and read what they're supposed to know. So just going to start off scrolling down to that section. Make sure you talk about the 6 environments in detail in your final group project. You should have about 3 or 4 pages of each one. Competition is the most important one to talk about, of course. Globalization, almost every company should talk about globalization to some extent. Sustainable development. Cultural environment is also important. Viral marketing, if you can find it about the companies. Okay, I'm getting into so that's the halfway point. Government influence on trade, tariffs and subsidies. So this is something that would be mentioned in the context of the OECD, and we'll talk about what the OECD did so that you know about that. Government influence on trade and the weather situation. 7 trends affecting companies, and you should read this section here. Okay, just going further down. Maps. Okay, we talked about this in class today about the fact that China and India are both the largest countries in the world by population. U.S. is second, but it's way down. There's no country of 700 million, no country of 500 million. There's just U.S. at 330 million, and then boom, you're into Indonesia, Pakistan, Brazil. None of the European countries are here. These are the big countries of large populations, but they don't have economies proportionate to that. Then I also talked to the students about GDP per capita. Canada's way up at the top here, but then you look at China and India, they're way at the bottom. So yes, the population is high, but the GDP per capita is quite low. So that's a big challenge for those two countries. All right, foreign direct investment concepts, and I talked about how the fact that this is what causes people to go overseas. You should read this story here about Bridgestone, Firestone, and what are the reasons why it went overseas. That's actually my Jeep with my tires on it. And these are some of the reasons why a company gets involved in foreign direct investment. And there's an example of one of the newer plants of Bridgestone in Canada in 2021. So I'll read that section. So what you try to find is what are some foreign direct investment situations that your company doing for the final group project. I also talked a little bit about sovereignty and foreign direct investment. I talked about how fact sometimes these companies are so big they're bigger than the country. For example, Royal Dutch Shell is bigger than the country of Denmark. So if they're negotiating about some situation, the Shell company will just say, well, if you don't give us what we want, we'll just go to Sweden, or we'll just go to Finland, or we'll go to some other Scandinavian country. And puts a lot of pressure on the government of Denmark to capitulate, which is very, very difficult because they might not be able to get politically reelected as a result of that. Um, and if you didn't have a chance to talk about economic supremacy in 4 categories, this is something that I had mentioned the previous week. These are the countries that have planes. These are the countries that make trains. These are the countries that make automobiles. These are the countries that make phones and devices. And if you look at this, Canada's in each country. Sorry, in each column. What that means, though, is it's a way of me showing how if a country wants to be a big player in the world, these are 4 things that you should make or use or be able to make parts for. You have to be big enough to make planes. You have to be big enough to make cars and phones. Those are the big, huge, major industries. So that's why I made a list of them like that. Then we talked about the OECD, and we talked about the fact that what the OECD does is collect information on statistics to allow people to make uh, evaluations of things. For example, talking about the number of men and women in different occupations and whether they have a university or college education. So the OECD produces reports like that. An example would be something like this. Real estate, Royal LePage talking about how farmland in Canada is priced differently, and the economy and infrastructure are problems, and so on. Okay. Then we talked about collaborative relationships. These are things, this section right here is something you're going to have to read and find out which are some of these collaborative relationships that your company's got involved in. You're not going to be able to do a whole list. You may just do 2 or 3 here, 1 or 2 there, 1 or 2 there, and that's about it. Okay, we didn't get a chance to talk about counter trade. I don't think we talked about the Coke Pepsi thing yet in this class on Monday. Trade missions, I haven't talked about that yet. I'll do that next week. And same thing with these subjects here. We'll do them next week on April 10th. Outsourcing and offshoring, yes, we talked about this. We talked about Pirates of the Caribbean. And we talked about the original purpose of outsourcing was to allow companies and businesses to focus on selling their product. So what they do is they get a guy who has a horse and a buggy to do the delivering for them. So they outsource the delivery part. And then we talked a little bit about, I'll just bring this map across here. We talked about the original source of outsourcing was when the Queen of England left the war with France to try to get involved in what was going on in the Caribbean here in the 1600s. Spain and Portugal had been in here for some long time, taking back gold and slaves and coffee and all kinds of things. And England wanted to get in on the action, but they couldn't afford to because they were fighting a war with France. So what England did was they made a deal with the pirates to give them a license that if they stole from the Spanish and brought this stuff back to England, then they would pay them for it. So that's called a Pirates of the Caribbean. That's the original source of the term privateer. It's like a pirate who gets paid to rob somebody on behalf of somebody else. So that was a little story I told about Pirates of the Caribbean, and that Captain Morgan was the original leader of the pirate crew, and he was actually given by the Queen the title of the governor of Jamaica for all his pirate activities. Kind of interesting, eh? That's like the mayor of New York being named as P. Diddy because he's such a gangster, and they're going to make him the mayor of New York City. That was Pirates of the Caribbean. Right. And we also talked about outsourcing in terms of China no longer selling things from their country and then putting it on boats who go across, but actually making manufacturing in Mexico, then go across the border in the United States. So, hope that's helpful.